Hello everyone, and welcome to the Puzzle Proof, your go-to corner of the internet for unraveling mysteries, brain teasers, and everything that keeps your little grey cells buzzing. I'm thrilled you've joined us today. Before we dive in, drop a comment below and let me know, where in the world are you tuning in from? Can't wait to see our community map grow. Chapter 1, An Invitation to Windham Hall. Hercule Poirot awoke to the gentle patter of rain against his curtained window and the soft chiming of his little clock. His morning toilet complete, he settled into his rose velvet armchair to enjoy a cup of Darjeeling tea. At precisely 8:30, a footman announced a visitor, a messenger bearing a single sheet of heavy ivory paper, sealed with deep carmine wax bearing the crest of a rampant lion. Poirot broke the seal with the tip of his silver paper knife and smoothed the delicate script. Monsieur Poirot, we should be honored by your presence at Windham Hall this weekend. It concerns a matter of some delicacy and urgency. Your discretion and celebrated expertise are most earnestly requested. Lady Penelope Rutherford. As Poirot read and reread the note, his little grey cells hummed with anticipation. He folded the letter neatly, placed it atop his silver writing set, and rang for his valet, Alfred. Do courage, Alfred, he exclaimed, we must prepare post-haste for a journey into the Somerset countryside. By mid-morning, Poirot and Alfred were on the 10:15 express from Paddington Station. Across the compartment window, the city's skyline yielded to verdant fields and hedgerows dotted with clumps of wild foxglove. Poirot's keen gaze traced every detail: a solitary shepherd tending his flock on a distant knoll, a brace of pheasants startled into flight. Alfred dozed lightly. Poirot, however, sat upright, black bowler hat perfectly poised, gloved hands resting on his lap. The train pulled into Taunton Station as dusk began to fall, the platform lamps casting pools of golden light on gleaming rails. A battered carriage waited, and within minutes they rattled along a twisting lane lined by towering oaks. Through the misty gloom, Windham Hall emerged like a stately ship upon a rolling sea of emerald lawns. Built in the Georgian style, its pale stone facade was crowned by a row of classical columns, and dozens of tall windows glowed warmly. Ivy crawled up one wing, hinting at the estate's long history. Poirot inhaled the crisp air, tinged with lavender from nearby borders. Already, the hall spoke to him of secrets hidden behind its respectable exterior. Lady Penelope Rutherford greeted them in the grand entrance hall, her poised figure framed by an intricately carved oak arch. She was a woman of graceful bearing, though her pale grey eyes betrayed a flicker of anxiety as they met Poirot's. Beside her stood Sir Edwin Rutherford, a tall gentleman with silver hair and the air of a retired diplomat. Their gracious welcome was courteous yet measured. Monsieur Poirot, Lady Penelope said, offering a slender hand clad in ivory glove, we are most grateful you could come so swiftly. Sir Edwin inclined his head gravely. Pray, follow us to the drawing room. Supper has been delayed until your arrival. In the softly lit drawing room, framed family portraits surveyed the gathering guests, ancestors immaculately attired in powdered wigs and brocade. Miss Emily Rutherford, their only daughter, sat by the fireplace, her cheeks were flushed, and she toyed nervously with the silken folds of her gown. She rose to curtsy, revealing sapphire blue eyes and a single tear glinting at the corner of her lash. Poirot observed the delicate tremor in her hand as she returned to her seat. He noted, too, that the sapphire brooch at her throat, an heirloom entrusted to her care, seemed to catch the firelight with peculiar intensity. Around the polished mahogany supper table were assembled 6 others. Colonel George Smythe, recently returned from service in India, wore the look of a man accustomed to authority, yet his jaw was set tight, as though he battled frustrations hidden beneath his crisp uniform. Dr. Edward Langley, the family's physician, sat with refined courtesy, his crisp starched collar and sober tie seemed at odds with the moisture glinting on his brow. Miss Madeline Claremont, a rising concert pianist, inclined her head demurely, dark hair in a neat chignon, long fingers resting upon her lap as if already poised over a clavier. Mr. Arthur Percival, a solicitor with a reputation for shrewd negotiation, surveyed the room behind half-masks of polite interest. Finally, there was Madame Blanche, the housekeeper, a woman of exacting standards, who carried herself with rigid propriety, though her eyes darted nervously whenever Emily glanced her way. As supper progressed, from buttered trout to wild mushroom ragout, conversation flowed, talk of the county garden party, the promise of autumn harvest, and Emily's forthcoming engagement to Lord Henry Ashton. Yet under the polite veneer lay currents of disquiet. Colonel Smythe twice reached for his wine, only to withdraw his hand as Lady Penelope glanced in his direction. Dr. Langley coughed softly when Emily mentioned the Brooch's recent insurance valuation, as though startled by her words. Mr. Percival added an aside about the peculiarities of family heirlooms, but his clipped tone suggested he spoke from personal experience. Poirot, meanwhile, sat with perfect stillness, moustache immaculately waxed, his eyes alight. He listened to every inflection, noted every hesitation. "Madam," he murmured later to Lady Penelope in a low tone, "it seems that more than one heart in this house is uneasy." Later, as the guests lingered over coffee and petits fours, Poirot was shown to his suite, a room richly panelled in dark oak, with heavy damask curtains and a small writing desk. He placed his suitcase upon the chair. Chapter 2, The Missing Sapphire. Morning light filtered through the lace curtains of Miss Emily Rutherford's boudoir, scattering pale motes over the polished walnut floor. Emily, still in her silk dressing gown, reached automatically for the brooch pinned at her throat, and found only an empty pin. Her breath caught. The sapphire, the Rutherford family's most treasured heirloom, had vanished. Frantic, she pressed the bell. Within moments, Madame Blanche hurried in, her starched apron immaculate but her face ashen. "La brooch, it is gone, miss," she whispered, trembling. Emily clutched at a gilded dressing table, her eyes wide with distress. Downstairs in the drawing room, Lady Penelope Rutherford received Emily's sobbing account. She drew a deep breath and summoned Hercule Poirot at once. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her usually calm voice faltering, "we are in dire need of your unique talents." Sir Edwin stood at her side, his composed demeanour belying concern. "If ever there were a crisis demanding your little grey cells, this is it," he added gravely. Poirot rose, smoothing his immaculate moustaches. "Madam, sir, I shall attend to this matter at once." Ascending the grand staircase, Poirot paused to note the stately portraits lining the landing, Rutherford ancestors gazing down with solemn regard. He reached Emily's door, found it ajar, and stepped into the perfumed stillness of her boudoir. The room spoke of refinement, a chaise longue draped with violet velvet, an ebony dressing table cluttered with porcelain jars of rose water and face powder, and a tall cheval mirror reflecting the morning sun. Yet disorder lay beneath. He rose and turned his attention to the dressing table mirror. A smudge across the glass caught the light, brownish, as though soil or dust had been smeared. With delicate care, Poirot dipped a corner of a linen handkerchief into the tiny vessel of eau de cologne he carried and pressed against the smudge. "Subtle, mais précis," he murmured, noting its pattern. He then crossed to the window. The catch was unfastened, though the sash remained intact, no broken glass lay on the sill. Yet Poirot's keen eyes detected a slender scrap of blue fabric caught on the latch, frayed at one edge. He slipped it into a sealable envelope tucked into his coat pocket. Before leaving the room, Poirot paused by the dressing table and gestured to the open letter rack. A note addressed to Emily, written in neat handwriting, lay face down beneath a gilt photo frame. He pocketed it for later examination. Down the corridor, Emily, hands clasped at her waist, waited anxiously. Her eyes filled with tears as Poirot approached. "Mademoiselle," he said gently, "the sapphire will be found. But I must ask you about your movements last evening." Emily bit her lip. "I went to the conservatory at 9 to practice my new waltz. After that, I returned here for a cup of cocoa. I cannot imagine who would do such a thing." Poirot nodded sympathetically. "Have you observed anything unusual? Any visitors, any faint sounds?" Emily shook her head. "Only a soft footstep, perhaps, but I thought it was one of the maids." Poirot made a small note. He instructed Madame Blanche to fetch all household staff for questioning. In the hall below, the housekeeper's severe features betrayed agitation. Poirot addressed her kindly. "Madam, you have served this family many years. Did you notice anyone loitering near Miss Emily's apartments after supper?" Blanche swallowed. "No, monsieur. But I did hear raised voices in the west wing, near the library. I thought it was Sir Edwin and Mr. Percival discussing business." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And the servants? Any whispers among them?" Blanche hesitated. "There is talk of debts. Colonel Smythe's finances are said to be precarious." At that moment, Dr. Edward Langley emerged from the front drawing room, his medical bag in hand. Poirot caught the tremor of relief in the doctor's shoulders upon seeing Emily unharmed. He asked Dr. Langley to inspect any physical evidence, footprints, smudges, perhaps a hint of poison or powder. The doctor's practiced gaze lingered on the blue scrap Poirot produced. "Curious," Langley mused, "this fabric appears to be from a gentleman's waistcoat rather than a lady's garment." Poirot's brow furrowed. "Precisely, doctor. And yet it was found on the window latch of a lady's dressing room." Meanwhile, Colonel Smythe appeared at the grand staircase, white and drawn. Poirot intercepted him. "Colonel, might I ask where you were between 10 and 11 last night?" The colonel fidgeted with the cuff of his tunic. I took the air in the garden, monsieur. I found it too warm indoors." Poirot's gaze was steady. "In the garden? Did you note anyone else there?" Smythe hesitated, then shook his head. "No one, monsieur. The moon was behind clouds, one could hardly perceive a figure." By late morning, Poirot had collected several items: the scrap of blue fabric, the smudged handkerchief, Emily's unsigned note, and statements from Blanche, Langley, and Smythe. Retiring to his sitting room, he arranged the evidence on a small walnut table. As he sipped a delicate cup of tea, he reflected on the curious footprint, too small to be the footman's, and the fabric, impossible to place among the ladies of the house. The unlatched window and mirror smudge suggested egress rather than forced entry. Someone with knowledge of the household, Poirot concluded, had staged the scene to appear as a simple theft. Rising, Poirot donned his black overcoat and stepped onto the library balcony, surveying Windham Hall's sprawling lawns. A distant peal of laughter drifted from the rose garden, mingling with the twitter of swallows. Chapter 3, Interviews and Incidents. In the afternoon sunlight streaming through the mullioned windows of Windham Hall's oak-panelled library, Hercule Poirot prepared his small black notebook. Spread before him lay the scrap of blue wool, the smudged handkerchief and Emily's unsigned note, "Meet me at midnight." Yet Poirot knew the truth would emerge not from objects alone, but from the stories people told and the silences between their words. With his moustache immaculately waxed and silk handkerchief in his breast pocket, he summoned the household to a series of discreet interviews designed to tease out motive, opportunity, and subtle inconsistencies. He began with Lady Penelope Rutherford in the drawing room. She poured tea with trembling hands. "Monsieur," she admitted, "I arranged insurance on Emily's brooch only last week. The premiums were steep, but one cannot risk such a treasure." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Insurance gives comfort, madam, but it also creates temptation." He noted the faint musk of lilac on her glove, a perfume none of the servants wore. "Has any family member complained of financial strain?" he asked. Lady Penelope shook her head. "Only gentle concerns about our daughter's impulsiveness. Nothing more." Still, Poirot filed away her confession, a motive, however reluctant, now on record. Next, Miss Emily Rutherford met him in the conservatory, where white jasmine trailed along iron trellis. Emily's cheeks were pale, her eyes red-rimmed. "Monsieur, I inherited troubles, not jewels. I would never betray my family." Poirot produced the linen note. "Explain this message." Emily's lips quivered. "I found it this morning beneath my mirror." Dr. Edward Langley awaited in the billiard room, examining a loose floorboard. Poirot noted the doctor's hands shook as he prized up a sliver of wood. "Doctor, have you detected traces of anything unusual here?" Langley glanced at the scrap of wool Poirot held aloft. "This looks like a gentleman's cloth, not a lady's. Yet I found no powder or poison." The doctor's voice betrayed unease. Poirot noted the subtle sheen under Langley's fingernails. "You seem troubled." The doctor wiped his palms on an embroidered handkerchief. "I fear what this theft may provoke, yet I would never harm Emily." Still, the tremor in his left hand hinted at anxieties he would not name. Summoned to the servants' hall, Colonel George Smythe looked unwell. "Colonel, where were you between 10 and 11 last night?" Poirot asked. Smythe swallowed. "I took the air by the lake, monsieur, disturbed by heat." Poirot studied his face. "Did you see anyone?" "No," Smythe insisted, though his neat side whiskers bore a smudge of clay. "The ground is damp, one might lose a boot in the mire." Poirot made a note, a smudge here, an explanation there, an opportunity disguised as misadventure. In the drawing room, Miss Madeleine Clairmont sat at the grand piano, slender fingers brushing silent keys. "Madam, you discovered a note under the music stand." Madeleine closed her eyes. "Yes, meet me at midnight." I thought it meant someone wished to speak of my recital. Poirot asked her to replicate the handwriting. The slight slant and delicate loops matched Emily's note, yet differed in pressure. "Whom did you suspect?" he probed. Finally, Poirot visited Mr. Arthur Percival in his wood-panelled study. The solicitor, fingers steepled, looked up from a ledger. "Monsieur Poirot, you questioned my remarks on insurance fraud last night." Poirot inclined his head. "Merely professional insight." Percival's lip curled in a faint smile. "I deal with claims daily, I offer only informed opinion." Poirot noted no tremor in his voice, only a glint of triumph. "Be wary, monsieur, for motive can be a fickle mistress." Percival returned to his papers, leaving the detective to ponder whether legal expertise masked darker designs. As each interview concluded, Poirot withdrew to a corner of the library to review his notes: Lady Penelope's lilac perfume, Emily's sincere bewilderment, Langley's tremor, Smythe's clay-smudged whiskers, Madeleine's dual notes, and Percival's clipped tone. A sudden crash from the corridor startled him. The footman had dropped a tray of silver cutlery. Poirot observed the youth's red face and glanced at his boots, spotless, yet the corner of one cuff was torn. A fresh clue or mere accident? Setting aside his tea, Poirot reached once more for his notebook. His little grey cells were racing, the web of interview. Chapter 4, A Frightful Night. The household retired early to the dining room for a modest supper of pheasant consommé and roast partridge, the plates set with impeccable precision and candles glowing in silver sconces. Outside, a wind rose over the Somerset hills, rattling window panes and carrying low moans through the ivy-clad walls. Conversation drifted from polite inquiries, Colonel Smythe's health, Dr. Langley's latest medical paper, to subdued laughter as Madame Blanche teased Emily about her forthcoming dance. Poirot observed each gesture, the Colonel's tightening jaw, Dr. Langley's occasional glances at the servants' gallery, and Miss Claremont's restless tapping of her fan. All seemed civilized, yet each mind hid its private unrest. Halfway through coffee, the lights flickered. First one chandelier dimmed, then every lamp in the east wing died. A shuddering gasp passed through the company. In the instant darkness, a distant thud resounded, like heavy footsteps on the grand staircase, followed by a stifled cry. Poirot rose calmly, folding his hands as if he anticipated the disturbance. "Rest assured, Miss Amis," he said evenly, "I shall illuminate the situation in due course." Yet his grey eyes gleamed with alertness. Alfred slipped to retrieve candles, while Emily clutched Lady Penelope's sleeve. Outside, the wind's lament seemed to swell, as though the night itself conspired with whatever mischief had befallen Windham Hall. With candles relit, the party gathered at the foot of the broad staircase. There lay Madame Blanche, her starched cap knocked askew, unconscious and pale as bone. A crescent-shaped bruise darkened her temple, a smear of blood mottled the bottom stair. Poirot knelt beside her, noting the slight tremble of her hands. "Almond," he breathed, catching a faint, sickly sweet aroma in the air, possibly prussic acid. He frowned. "Remarkable, we have both a fall and the whiff of poison." He gently lifted Blanche's wrist. Her pulse was rapid but steady. "See to her at once, Doctor," he instructed, handing a candle to Dr. Langley, who sprang forward with medical bag in hand. While Dr. Langley knelt by Madame Blanche, Poirot examined the staircase. The carpet runner was loose at the 5th step, the edge curled as if recently tugged. He prized a corner of the fabric, revealing a shallow gouge in the polished oak beneath. Scuff marks, 2 distinct impressions, streaked the wood, suggesting not one misstep but 2. Someone aimed to induce a fall, Poirot observed to Colonel Smythe, who hovered anxiously. Yet the Colonel's dark eyes betrayed both shock and a flicker of calculation. "Perhaps," he murmured, "but why endanger the housekeeper?" Poirot next endeavored to locate the source of the bitter almond scent. He traced it to the candlestick on the landing. Its brass base bore a faint smear of oily residue. He lifted the candlestick gingerly with a cloth and examined its hollow underside. There, nestled in a small cavity, was the stopper of a scent bottle, a fragment of dark glass etched with no label. Poison vapor, Poirot concluded, had been released when the candle warmed the brass. He carefully bagged the glass shard. "A clever device," he murmured, "but one that leaves its maker exposed." The consternation among the guests deepened when the footman appeared, apologizing breathlessly. His shoes were missing. I went to fetch more candles from the pantry," he stammered, "and left my brogues by the door. They were gone when I returned." Colonel Smythe frowned. "Taken by whom?" The footman shook his head. "I cannot say, Colonel." Poirot's gaze flicked to the door. Outside, a stable boy, Laurent, stood nervously, clutching a pair of mud-spattered brogues. "I borrowed these for a moment," Laurent admitted. "My own were lost in the fields." He placed the brogues at Poirot's feet. The pattern of scuffs did not match those on the staircase, they were too large for the footprints below. Back in the vestibule, Poirot rang for Alfred. "Fetch the household inventory, that list of candles, stoppers, and any unusual items in the stores," he instructed. As Alfred departed, Poirot surveyed the assembled company: Colonel Smythe, flushed and uneasy; Dr. Langley, white-faced yet watchful; Miss Claremont, pale and silent; Mr. Percival, coolly detached. Each wore an expression that betrayed more than the outward calm suggested. The silent footman watched his returned brogues, and Laurent looked on with guilty eyes. All appeared legitimate, yet Poirot's little grey cells detected the faintest weave of deceit. When Alfred returned with the parchment inventory, Poirot cross-checked the list. Only one scent bottle was missing, a vial of bitter almond essence used for culinary imitation. Its stopper matched the fragment from the candlestick. Hence, the poison had been repurposed. Poirot turned to the group. "Miss Amis, we have witnessed an attempt on Madame Blanche's life, cleverly masked as accident. The poison was hidden in her lantern, the runner loosened to ensure her fall." He paused, letting the weight of his observation settle. "Now we must ask, who among us desired Madame Blanche's demise so badly?" As the household reeled, Poirot retreated to his sitting room to reflect. Outside, rain began to lash the mullioned windows, and thunder rumbled across the night sky. He placed the glass shard, runner fragment, and melted candle stub in separate envelopes. Each clue pointed toward careful planning, yet one piece was missing: the motive for targeting the faithful housekeeper. Lighting his desk lamp, he sat to note every theory, every impression gleaned this fearful night. The storm intensified, but at Windham Hall, the true tempest was only beginning, and Poirot's razor-sharp mind was already at work to unravel it. Chapter 5: Red Herrings and Clues. By Sunday afternoon, the oak-panelled library was quiet save for the crackle of the fire in the hearth. The household gathered at Poirot's summons, each guest finding a seat in the deep leather armchairs or upon the velvet settee. At the center of the room, Poirot arranged 3 items on an ebony side table: a scrap of blue wool, tarnished button upon a slip of paper, and a small vial of branded smelling salts. He steepled his fingers, moustache quivering with anticipation. "Miss Amis, allow me to present the clues upon which our mystery pivots, and some cunning diversions that I suspect have misled us." First, he lifted the scrap of wool between thumb and forefinger. "Does this fabric ring any bell?" he asked, addressing Miss Madeleine Claremont. The pianist, pale yet poised, studied the cloth. "It resembles the lining of my traveling cloak," she admitted, "but mine is cream-colored silk." Her denial was honest yet carried a hint of uncertainty. Poirot nodded. "Precisely. The hue and weave are coarse, more akin to a gentleman's overcoat than a lady's garment. A subtle false trail, perhaps, to implicate one who is innocent." Turning slightly, Poirot passed the scrap to Colonel Smythe. "Colonel, you stroll so often in your grey tweed. Does this match your coat?" The colonel's brow furrowed. "No, monsieur." Next, Poirot picked up the button. It lay upon a paper slip bearing the initials, E.B. "Observe this button," he said, holding it aloft. "It came from a coat once belonging to Emily's governess, Mrs. Edmonds, long since deceased. How curious that it should appear now." Gasps rippled through the room. Lady Penelope stammered, "But she has been gone these 20 years." Dr. Langley leaned forward. "Curious indeed." Poirot pressed on: either someone donned her coat as disguise, or this button was placed to implicate a ghost of the past. Mr. Arthur Percival, arms folded, spoke with calm assurance. "Surely, Monsieur Poirot, we are to believe a murderer rummaged through attic chests for an old governess's garments." Poirot's eyes glinted. "Monsieur, cleverness lies in drawing suspicion to the spectral rather than the living." He pocketed the button. The true culprit, I propose, did not venture into dusty attics. He held the button all along. Poirot then placed the vial of branded smelling salts on the table. "This was Madame Blanche's, correct?" he asked. The housekeeper, seated stiffly, nodded. "I use it nightly for relief." Poirot's gaze shifted to Dr. Langley. "Yet this vial is untouched, while another bottle, identical in appearance, is missing from your medical case." The doctor swallowed. I must have misplaced it." Poirot smiled thinly. A convenient lapse for someone who wished to borrow its scent, and its deadly potential. A hush fell as Poirot stood. "Let us not overlook the smaller diversions." He produced a small, folded note, the linen leaf message, "Meet me at midnight," found in Emily's dressing room. "Two of our guests discovered identical notes in separate locations," he observed. "Miss Claremont found one under her music stand, Emily." He paused to survey the company. "Then there was the footprint, no larger than a child's, we believed. Yet the footman's shoes proved too large, and the stable boys were muddied in the fields. So whose print was it?" Colonel Smythe looked uneasy. "A visiting child," he ventured. Poirot suppressed a smile. Such innocence would perplex less astute investigators. He tapped the carpet. "No, in my view, the footprint was traced from a boot someone had seen worn by the Colonel at the garden fete last month. A calculated likeness to misdirect us toward him. Collecting the false leads, the silk mimicking wool, the antique button, the twin notes, the child-sized print, Poirot replaced them gently in his pockets. "My friends," he said, voice low and even, "red herrings of this sort are the very lifeblood of cunning criminals. Yet they cannot survive the illumination of reason." He allowed a moment's silence before concluding, "Behind these disguises lies one coherent plan, an audacious theft followed by an attempt on life, masked by theatrical trickery." As the fire's glow danced upon the shelves of leather-bound volumes, Poirot settled into his armchair. He clasped his hands and regarded each guest in turn. "We have unearthed distractions aplenty. Tomorrow, I shall pursue the genuine thread, seeking the motive and the solitary figure bold enough to orchestrate such a spectacle." The assembled company sat spellbound, aware that the next revelation would tear away the veils and expose the true villain. Poirot's little grey cells were already choreographing the final act. Chapter 6: The Psychology of Crime. Late that Sunday afternoon, a hush settled over Windham Hall as the guests dispersed to their various retreats. The air, heavy with storm-laden clouds, pressed against the tall mullioned windows. In his private sitting room, Poirot reflected upon the evidence amassed so far, the staged theft of the Sapphire, the attempted poisoning of Madame Blanche, and a welter of red herrings artfully deployed. Yet it was not mere physical clues that occupied his thoughts, but the hidden motives and tremors of character that underpinned every act. He reclined in his high-backed armchair, perfumed handkerchief in hand, and reviewed each suspect's demeanor. Lady Penelope had arranged insurance on the heirloom only days before, an act born of maternal anxiety, yet one that risked sowing suspicion. Colonel Smythe, courteous yet withdrawn, had blamed his garden stroll for muddy boots, though he could ill afford public embarrassment over financial debts. Dr. Langley's tremulous left hand hinted at guilt or fear. His professional knowledge had provided convenient means to misuse poison. Madeleine Claremont's anxious glance betrayed a performer's hypersensitivity to secrecy. And Mr. Percival, cool, assured, and ever the solicitor, seemed to know too much about the mechanics of deceit. Poirot rose and crossed to a small writing desk, behind which stood a large sketch of the staircase scene where Madame Blanche had nearly fallen. He traced the loosened runner with his finger, recalling how the poison had been concealed in the... He replaced the sketch and walked to the window. Below, the rose garden lay sodden with recent rain, petals drifting like crimson tears across the grass. From this vantage, he imagined the fearful glance of Madame Blanche as she slipped and struck her head. He asked himself what secret she might have stumbled upon, a whispered conversation, a cryptic note, perhaps knowledge of the Sapphire's hiding place. A motive thus emerged not merely to steal the jewel, but to silence the housekeeper who had observed too much. Summoning his valet, Alfred, Poirot dispatched a discreet message, all servants to report to the library at tea time. As the sun sank behind the horizon, the household gathered once more. Poirot motioned for silence and spoke in measured tones. "My friends, yesterday we examined clues of a material nature. Today, we must explore the motives that animate the human heart." He paused, allowing the gravity of his words to settle. "Consider, first," he continued, addressing Lady Penelope, "your fear that the Sapphire's disappearance would scandalize your daughter. A mother's love is formidable, but does it justify deception?" Lady Penelope met his gaze with steely resolve. "Monsieur, I would do anything to protect Emily's future." Poirot inclined his head. A commendable instinct, yet one that might lead to unwitting complicity in darker designs. Turning to Colonel Smythe, he observed, "You appeared most eager to shift suspicion away from yourself, le Colonel, by feigning nocturnal wanderings. Yet your financial constraints are no secret. Could the Brooch insurance payout have tempted you?" Smythe bristled. "I would not stoop so low," he protested. But Poirot noted how the Colonel's hands clenched the arms of his chair. A man in desperation may act against his honor. Poirot then studied Dr. Langley. "Doctor, you possess both knowledge and opportunity. The bitter almond aroma was your concoction, yet you claimed ignorance of the missing vial. A physician's Hippocratic oath should forbid such poison, unless one's motives are personal rather than professional." The doctor's jaw tightened. "I sought only to aid Madame Blanche," he said, voice low. Poirot raised an eyebrow but made no further comment. Addressing Madeleine Clairmont, Poirot asked softly, "Artiste, you discovered a cryptic note beneath your music stand. You believed it pertained to your recital, yet it may have been placed to draw you into the plot." Madeleine's pale gaze flickered. I felt frightened," she admitted. "But I thought myself safe behind the piano." Poirot nodded. "Fear, when misplaced, can be the greatest ruse." Finally, he confronted Mr. Percival. "Monsieur, your expertise in wills and insurance claims is unrivaled. You spoke of motives as though rehearsing them yourself. A solicitor's mind can conceive many stratagems, yet only one criminal employs them." Percival's calm facade cracked ever so slightly, a tremor in his lip. He rose to leave, but Poirot held up a hand. "Stay, Illinois Vause Plat." Having outlined each suspect's possible motive, Poirot leaned forward. "And now, a test of truth, I propose a gathering tonight in the drawing room, under the pretext of discussing Emily's engagement. There, I shall watch the subtle signals of guilt and innocence, the slightest hesitation, the shifted gaze, the crushing of a teacup." He closed his notebook. "For it is in the mind, its fears and desires, that the fingerprints of crime are most indelibly impressed." As the guests exchanged uneasy glances, the distant rumble of thunder echoed through the grand halls. Poirot, serene and poised, pressed his gloved fingertips to his moustache. "Tonight," he whispered to himself, "the little grey cells will reveal the psychological tapestry behind this intrigue, and I shall unmask the mind bent on both theft and harm." Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall, heralding a night of revelation. Chapter 7, The Ingenious Trap. That evening, a tense hush fell over Windham Hall as dusk deepened into night. In the oak-panelled drawing room, Poirot arranged a circle of candles upon the grand mahogany table. The guests, Lady Penelope, Sir Edwin, Emily, Colonel Smythe, Dr. Langley, Miss Claremont, and Mr. Percival, took their places, seats angled toward the center. Poirot addressed them with quiet authority. Miss Amis, this séance shall serve two purposes, to calm the household's anxieties, and, more importantly, to reveal the mind behind these misdeeds. He smiled thinly. I beg your indulgence in this theatrical exercise. Outside, a soft wind moaned against the mullioned windows. Madame Blanche stood by Poirot's side, her hand resting on his arm. He displayed the second vial of smelling salts, clean and unopened. Observe, this is identical to the one used to imperil Madame Blanche. We proceed, therefore, under controlled conditions, to guard against further danger. He nodded to Alfred, who dimmed the gas lamps until only the candle's flicker remained. Shadows danced upon the portraits of Rutherford ancestors, lending the room a ghostly atmosphere. Poirot motioned for silence and placed his hand on the cool crystal surface of the table. Let us summon any spirit who contends that justice has been denied. Madame Blanche, voice trembling, began to speak an invocation in a hushed tone. Colonel Smythe's stiff posture betrayed skepticism, Dr. Langley's gaze flicked nervously from candle to guest, Miss Claremont's fingers tapped a soft rhythm on her knee. Only Percival sat composed, lips curved in a polite but inscrutable smile. As they leaned forward, Poirot deftly pressed a concealed lever beneath the table's edge. A soft click echoed through the chamber. Immediately, he signaled Alfred, who extinguished the candles in the recesses of the room, leaving only those on the table alight. In the semi-darkness, the crystal bowl at the center gleamed like a portal to another world. Poirot spoke in a low, sonorous voice, "Spirits of the hall, reveal yourselves and speak your truth." No response but a breath of wind through the open shutters. Yet just as skepticism threatened to overwhelm the gathering, a muffled gasp came from Sir Edwin's chair. He started forward, upsetting his seat. Poirot hailed Alfred, who hurried to steady the baronet. Meanwhile, Percival leaned over the table, his face suddenly pale. He reached out to touch the crystal bowl, only for his hand to recoil as if stung. At that moment, the bottle of smelling salts, secretly warmed by the concealed lamp beneath the table, released a pungent vapor that drifted upward. Percival clutched his coat collar, eyes watering. "What is this?" he wheezed. Poirot observed with satisfaction as Percival's composure faltered. "A demonstration, monsieur," he said quietly. "I wish to show how easily one may be affected by such odors." Percival glared at him, but his shaking hands belied inner turmoil. Suddenly, Colonel Smythe sprang from his seat, lunging toward the table and attempting to seize the crystal bowl. "You tricked us!" he cried. Emily screamed, Lady Penelope rose, hand to her throat. Poirot stood, raising a placating hand. "Colonel, calm yourself." Smythe's eyes blazed. "This charade, it masks the truth. You would test me as if I were mad." Dr. Langley stepped forward to restrain him, but Poirot forestalled the intervention. "Enough," Poirot commanded, voice firm. He pressed a second hidden release, candles along the walls flared back to life. In the sudden brightness, Percival sat slumped, his face caked with perspiration. The table itself revealed its secret, a slender brass reservoir under one table leg, once holding the scent essences. Poirot produced a shattered fragment of dark glass from his coat pocket. "Here is the contraption that loosed the vapor," precisely the same as that found in Madame Blanche's candlestick. Percival's mouth twisted. "This proves nothing," he retorted, voice hoarse. Poirot fixed him with a measured stare. "Oh, but it does, monsieur. You claimed ignorance of the missing vial, yet you sat at this table." Chapter 8, Poirot's Denouement. The following morning, the household assembled once more in the oak-panelled library. A pale dawn filtered through the tall windows, lending the bookshelves a soft glow. Lady Penelope clutched Emily's hand, her eyes shadowed by the ordeal of the past days. Colonel Smythe stood rigid, his brow still furrowed in perplexity. Dr. Langley leaned against a chair, composed yet wary. Miss Claremont sat poised at the writing desk, her pale fingers twisting a corner of her handkerchief. And at the far end, Arthur Percival, his usual composure shattered, stood with head bowed, awaiting Poirot's address. Poirot rose and surveyed the company with calm authority, his moustache immaculately waxed and his gloved hands clasped behind his back. "Miss Amis," he began, "yesterday we witnessed a series of deceptions, ingenious diversions intended to mislead and confuse. Today, I shall demonstrate how each clue, each fragment, fits together in one coherent design." He stepped to the side table and lifted the scrap of blue wool. This thread, found on Emily's window latch, seemed at first to implicate Colonel Smythe, for he is often seen in his grey overcoat. Yet the weave and weight are too coarse for his fine cloth, and indeed too dull for Miss Claremont's cloak. In truth, it was torn from Percival's own travelling coat, a garment he borrowed from his office wardrobe stored here in the house, thereby planting a false trail. He placed the fabric down and picked up the tarnished button. Next, the button inscribed E.B., alas, not Emily's but her late governess's. Whoever sought to implicate a ghost of the past dug through attic chests to produce it. Yet only one person had both the opportunity and the motive to rummage unseen, our solicitor, Monsieur Percival, who maintained a private chest of documents and garments in the East Wing, ostensibly for estate matters. He removed a coat from that chest, seized its button, then returned the coat, leaving the button on the dressing table to baffle us. A hush fell. Poirot continued, producing the 2 linen leaf notes. Both found in separate rooms, one under Miss Claremont's music stand and one beneath Emily's mirror, read "Meet me alone at midnight." Their matching ink and precise slant convinced each young lady that the message was personal. Who penned them? Examine the handwriting, identical to the solicitor's neat script found in his correspondence. He laid the notes side by side. Percival sought to lure Miss Claremont, then Emily, to the West Wing for his own purposes, both to stall them and to veil his own nocturnal movements while the brooch was taken. Poirot then addressed the curious child-sized footprint. A small print near the boudoir door suggested an opportunistic maid or child. In reality, Percival took one of the housekeeper's toy brogues, kept for visiting nieces, to recreate a child's step. He walked deliberately to the latch, smashed the brooch, then replaced it with a leadway to open the box, all while obscuring his own larger footmarks. He tapped his temple. A clever trick, but the sole copy of the toy shoes sat in the linen closet, which only Percival unlocked with his private key. He moved to the evidence of attempted murder. Madame Blanche's fall was no accident. The runner was loosened at Percival's command, having tested its displacement earlier. The poison-smelling salts, identical to the bottle missing from Dr. Langley's case, were in fact swiped from the doctor's stores by Percival, who borrowed both its stopper and its scent. He placed the poison in Madame Blanche's candle reservoir, causing vapor to emanate and weaken her, then engineered the fall down the stairs. Lady Penelope gasped softly. Poirot raised a hand for calm. The motive, dear lady, was twofold, to silence Madame Blanche, who had discovered the missing sapphire hidden in the table drawer, and to create confusion so that the brooch might be sold swiftly, funding Percival's faltering practice. He turned to Percival. Your knowledge of insurance claims assured you that suspicion would fall on Lady Penelope for abrupt insurance application. Your acquaintance with medical subtleties enabled the poisoning. And your legal expertise guided each misdirection. Percival's shoulders slumped. He made no attempt to defend himself. Poirot's voice softened as he addressed the assembled guests. In the elegant facades of propriety, criminals count on our preconceptions. Yet the little grey cells discern the truth beneath appearances. He gestured to Sir Edwin. I trust you will now ensure that justice is done. Emily retrieved her sapphire brooch from Poirot's hand, tears glinting in her eyes. Monsieur, she whispered, you have given us back more than a jewel, you have restored our peace of mind. Poirot inclined his head. It is the privilege of the detective to illuminate the darkness of crime with reason and observation. As Percival was escorted away, Colonel Smythe at last relaxed his rigid posture and murmured, truly remarkable, Monsieur Poirot. Dr. Langley offered his hand, voice thick with admiration. Even Miss Claremont managed a small smile. Lady Penelope embraced her daughter, relief flooding her features. Poirot lingered by the window, gazing over the Duquesne gardens. The first rays of sun now broke through the clouds, symbolizing the extinguishing